was in Washington, D.C. I was working at a university there. Went back into work into supporting the students who were just arriving abroad. Yeah, that's when all the things started to erode.
Cuando se canceló la escuela una semana antes de nuestras vacaciones de primavera, sí me puse un poco preocupado porque cancelaron mi obra, cancelaron mi competición de teatro, entonces sí me puse un poco más preocupado después de que se cancelaron las cosas, pero antes de eso no, yo no pensé nada del virus.
I felt like totally connected with students, totally connected with faculty, and then that just in an instant is taken away and you don't realize how important that actually is.
Everything shut down. And it was just like, wow, this is just crazy how quick this has happened.
Early February, I started to get a little bit concerned, a little bit nervous. It was feeling like it was going to impact the world.
I think I still thought, oh wow, that's awful. It kind of reminds me of other like flu epidemics or something, but that had been more contained. Like I didn't really expect it to travel the world.
1 week into my arrival in New Zealand, we went into one of the strictest lockdowns in the world. So that was quite a shock because my perception of what I was going to get going home versus staying in Portland had dramatically changed.
El cambio más grande fue, yo creo, en socializar, así, convivir con amigos. Eso fue muy difícil también. Yo estaba llamando, marcando a mis amigos cada día por FaceTime, por otras cosas, por Zoom también, para poder conectar, porque yo soy una persona que necesita estar con otra gente, estar platicando, estar conviviendo con amigos, y eso fue muy difícil para mí cuando comenzó la pandemia.
Yeah, pre-pandemic, it just seemed really full of life and possibility, because that's what students are here, right? It's like we're working with them to become the best people they can be. And when you don't get to interact with them physically, our brains are wired for social connections. And you would take away all those communication abilities we have with our faces, with our body language. And it's really difficult to still feel like you can connect as well.
And unfortunately, because of the pandemic, you're only seeing half of people's faces. So you're losing that sort of emotional connection where you are building that empathy by seeing people's emotions.
Following the outbreak of the pandemic, everything in international education totally shut down. So many colleagues that I had been working with at program locations overseas, and even within the field of international education at different universities were being furloughed or let go. And so the whole field of international education was working to understand what its purpose was in the midst of a time when students weren't able to travel.
There were moments when I felt like my brain is just not working right. Like no matter how hard I try, it's just not clicking in the same way. And I think that came from just hours of staring at a screen and not being able to have those nuanced conversations and to have everything so scheduled.
And unfortunately, a lot of professors, when we first started, wanted people to be present. There wasn't necessarily accommodations for the time zone differences.
The almost like reverting back to my high school self was bizarre. Doing college work alongside my little brother was bizarre. But I also, became closer with both of my parents now that they kind of saw me as an adult. So that was cool.
Because I had been through unemployment and was like, doing all these part-time jobs, I kind of all along felt like at risk of losing my job and then not knowing what I would do.
Our cross-country season got cancelled last fall, which was pretty disappointing. I'd spent a month that summer up in altitude training for that cross-country season, And so for it to get cancelled was pretty disappointing.
Early in the thing, we started watching Groundhog Day because it felt like it. You know, every day is the same. You wake up and you do the same things and you never leave your house.
It was a mad rush to bring students back from the overseas locations in which they were studying abroad. And that was something no one had ever had to do. And so it took a lot of coordination, a lot of information was being shared between universities and study abroad organizations. And it really was a beautiful showing of what community can do when they're all put in a position of needing to work together for the first time, or in an emergency circumstance rather.
Students without access to technology, students without access to support. And the library was amazing because they were really quickly trying to assemble laptops to loan, and everybody was scrambling a little bit. But that was on my mind in terms of people, well, what if somebody doesn't have the equipment, or what if somebody doesn't have the bandwidth? What if somebody doesn't have the access to these issues? You know, in what ways are we not serving students who don't have the kind of financial support of students who do, right? And all of the students were important, but that was on my mind from the kind of diversity lens.
I actually had to find somebody else that I knew in Portland. I had to drive to their house every day to use their internet.
I guess for ed students, we part of the program is we're in classrooms the beginning of freshman year to get that face-to-face time to learn from the teachers that are working. But unfortunately, because of the pandemic, we did not have that time. We lost a lot of, classroom hours that could have been really great for us.
Es mucho más fácil poder aprender en persona, tener el maestro ahí enfrente de ti para hacer preguntas, poder preguntarle a tus amigos o tus compañeras de clase que están al lado de ti, porque estar en una clase en Zoom o Teams o cualquier otra cosa por línea, es muy difícil poder hacer preguntas y así poder platicar con la gente. Eso es mucho más difícil.
You know, we started to do, more or less daily check-ins, and they weren't always just like meetings to talk about work, look at spreadsheets or all that kind of stuff. But it was just sometimes like, how you doing, right? Check-ins like that.
My son, I have two sons, and they've for years been wanting me to grow a beard, and I resisted because I knew it would come in with a lot of white. And vanity was too much, and so I didn't do it. Well, vanity's gone now. I think COVID sucked the vanity out of all of us. And it was like, okay, I'm gonna grow a beard. Grew a beard, and then when I was in my 20s and early 30s, I wore an earring, and it was like, I want to get my ear pierced again, and was actually able to get that hole, which was 30 years old, unused at least. I got it to work, and so now I'm sporting an earring again. So it was like, all of those old rules, it was like, there are no rules. I'm going to do whatever I want to do, and I don't care.
The things that got better were, I got a lot more time to be in nature. I got a lot more time to walk and exercise. I stopped commuting. Just all those things that I didn't realize I wasn't able to do because of a very strict kind of come to campus at this time and go home.
The going inward was good for me because so much of my time pre-pandemic was spent expending energy in all of these different directions outwardly. So it was really the perfect time in my life to slow down and to think and to plan and strategize and find new ways to grow.
I feel like fear was a motivator too. Like, how are we going to do this as a university, right? How are we still going to support our staff? How are we still going to support our students? Like, how do we do it? I'm afraid that if we don't do the work, things will just collapse. And that's like catastrophic thinking, and that's unhealthy. But that was, frankly, that was part of the motivation. It's just this fear that if we don't continue doing the work, who will do it? And that was also a motivator.
I had a lot of conflicting feelings of being so excited to be back and to see people in person again, and just like the small things of being in class and actually hearing other people laughing and not just seeing their faces laugh over Zoom has been wonderful. But then at the same time, like I've dealt with a lot of guilt of like, is it the right decision to be back on campus? Is that selfish of me? Is it selfish of me to go to an event even if it's masked? So like handling both those emotions has been pretty difficult.
También fue muy positivo estar con otra gente de otros años también que también tienen sus propias experiencias con COVID y poder platicar sobre eso y cómo ellos pudieron así mejorar su situación, porque otra gente comenzaron la universidad en el primer año de COVID y otras cosas así, entonces aprender lo que ellos hicieron para poder así acostumbrarse a esa situación me ayudó a mí para acostumbrarme a mi situación.
This fall, it was wonderful. It was so great to be back in a classroom and to see students, and there's just a different vibe you get when you're in person with people, and that made it was sort of again like a camaraderie moment because the students with me were like, we're back, oh my god, it's so good to see you, like you are in 3D.
I think going around campus in general, like every time I saw someone I thought I recognized, I would either like want to shout out and be like, hey, it's me, like remember me, we met each other online, or I would not want to say anything because I was just like, I never really saw their real face, so I have no idea if that's them. And there was, yeah, it's just like something you don't go through normally, you don't like think about.
It's like when you haven't ridden a bike for a long time and you're kind of like falling off a little bit and you're like, this is kind of embarrassing. I think that's how I felt about returning to staged theater. But it's like, you know, once you're on the bike and you start moving again, it's so much fun. But then like having this layer of like, okay, but we're wearing masks and how does that affect it? And then now we have to think about the audience and how many feet away do we have to be from the audience.
Todo el proceso de los ensayos fue con cubrebocas y luego la última semana antes de nuestra presentación las reglas cambiaron, entonces no teníamos que tener cubrebocas, solo teníamos que hacer como una prueba de COVID antígeno cada día. Entonces ver los otros actores en la obra sin cubrebocas por la primera vez ahí sí fue muy raro. Eso.
Having to like prepare myself to leave the house and drive somewhere, park somewhere, like take into account all of the time that each step would take was a challenge that I had forgotten how to do. And so I think I would be kind of nervous every morning that I had to come to campus. I would be a little bit anxious that I wasn't going to get there in time or that something was going to go wrong. And I just felt like I was, more anxious than I used to be about coming to teach.
Students are not getting the education level that they would have gotten, so some students are behind. And now as we're going back to school, you know, how are we going to meet students where they are while also get them to where they need to be?
I know it can be really difficult to be a student on UP's campus, especially if you're not a white cis man. I think you're constantly feeling like you have to defend yourself. You're constantly feeling like people are trying to invalidate you or invalidate your feelings, or that you need to take on more work in order to make any level of change for people like you. And I think probably the most pressing issue, which is being talked about, but it comes in waves to the degree that people care about it. I think the most pressing issue is how this university treats people of color, specifically women of color, on all levels.
The George Floyd event in particular really, really, really amplified the call to action around diversity, equity, and inclusion issues on campus in a way that I have never seen at UP. And it was an amazing thing happened that I think was really hard as an administrator to respond to it. Not because I didn't hear or appreciate or recognize the pain and the trauma that the students were coming from, but hard in terms of being able to navigate how to act on it. So there was a consortium of students, led in large part by the Black Student Union, but by a number of BIPOC identifying students and our LGBTQ students as well, putting forth a list of demands really of the administration. You know, let's do this, and this, and that was, you know, to me a sign of a healthy university.
I know I'm not unique in this position, and that way it's really comforting. Of all my friends have gone through this as well, but at the same time, it's like I want people to recognize this as like an individual struggle as well. Even though it is a collective grieving, it is so individual because each individual has lost something so specific to them.
I think in the back of my mind as a biologist, I'm like, this will continue to change. So I knew in the end this was a temporary situation and that eventually the virus will mutate, it will change, and we just have to learn to live with it. And that allowed me to see that this probably won't go on forever.
I hope that we also appreciate nature and its healing power as we seek ways to find self-care, but also seek ways to be good to the planet that we live on, knowing that our time is really fragile here and we never know what could happen next. And so being good to the earth and being good to each other go hand in hand.
I feel like I'm going through a grieving process at the moment. I'm graduating in a few months, and now as I reflect on my time back, I'm really proud of the things that I have accomplished, but I think of the year and 2 months that were stolen from me and how much I could have achieved in that time and how much I could have experienced in that time.
I feel like I've seen way more people being interested in medical sciences and medical fields, which, you know, it's always been a popular career to go into health sciences, but I think I've just seen more people feel that personal motivation instead of it being like, oh, well, you know, doctor, that's one of the things people do, right? Or like, yeah, my parents want me to be a doctor. It's more like, no, I want to be a doctor. I want to be a nurse.
I hope that we as a human community understand that life is fragile, and so the importance of living in the moment and being good to each other is essential.
Yo sí tengo mucha esperanza para nuestra comunidad, aquí en la UP y también en Portland, en Oregon, en todo el mundo, en poder mejorar nuestra sociedad. Ahorita yo creo que hay mucha división y es un poco a veces difícil poder estar así juntos como una comunidad, pero yo creo que con COVID siendo un evento tan fuerte, tan duro, tan difícil para la gente, espero que cuando eso se termine podamos así ver lo que pasó y poder mejorarnos como personas y como una comunidad.
We're not through this yet. You know, that's the hard part. Is we don't know what the next variant is. We don't know. I remind students when we're reading a book written in 1852 that, and I'll give you an example, Uncle Tom's Cabin. We read the exact same words the audience in 1852 read, but we read almost a completely different book because we know everything that happened in the subsequent years. We know that there was a civil war over the issue of slavery. Harriet Beecher Stowe didn't know that when she wrote the book. Her audience didn't know that when they read the book. They were living in that moment, and they didn't know how it ended. That's part of why we're this is so angst producing. We do not know how this story ends. There will be history books written about the age we're living through. We don't know how it's going to end. And that's maddening. That is absolutely angst producing, and just, we're all living in this state of edginess. And we have to remind ourselves of that, because I do think that's an important thing to remember is none of us, no one alive in this country has ever lived through anything like this. And we don't know how the story ends.